August 30 BC, the city of Alexandria. The sun hangs like a blood-red disk over the Mediterranean. The air is thick, almost suffocating. You can taste the salt, the fear, the ending of an era on your tongue. The greatest and most vast city of that time has frozen in anxious anticipation. A strange, unnatural silence hangs in the corridors of luxurious marble palaces and over the sun-scorched city squares. Even the famous lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the seven wonders of the world, stands dark and silent, as if it too knows that the light of an entire civilization is about to be extinguished. The streets that once echoed with the babble of 100 languages, Greek, Egyptian, Hebrew, Aramaic, Persian, now hold their breath. The great library, repository of 500,000 scrolls containing all the wisdom of the known world, seems to sense that a darker age is coming. The massive army of Rome, commanded by Octavian Augustus, a true machine of war, has already entered the city gates. 30,000 legionaries, battle-hardened from Spain to Gaul, from Germania to Africa. They are waiting for their ultimate moment of glory. They desperately want to see the last queen of Egypt surrender completely. Soldiers are already checking their weapons, imagining the victory parade through Rome's streets, picturing the chained queen stumbling behind their general's chariot while crowds throw rotten fruit and insults. But behind the closed doors of the royal quarter, an event is taking place that will overturn history not just for years, but for thousands of years to come. We all know this beautiful legend from school. A beautiful woman, realizing that defeat is inevitable, presses a venomous snake to her breast. What was it? A beautiful end to a great drama? A sad story of a broken heart? No. It was the most successful covert cover-up operation in human history. What happened on that stifling August day in the hidden rooms of the tomb resembles a scene from a very complex detective story.
Well done.
It is as if the prime suspect left a note with a cipher on the table and quietly disappeared through the back door, leaving the detective in utter bewilderment. Today, we open a case file that has been gathering dust in secret archives for 2,000 years. We will prove that Cleopatra didn't just take her own life. She performed a complex ritual of transition, turning her finale into a powerful political weapon, and this weapon struck Rome harder than any army. Let's return to that very room where it all ended, the tomb of Alexander the Great's lineage. Imagine the thick darkness of the tomb, the sound of rustling, expensive fabrics, and the heavy, sweet scent of incense masking the anxiety. The walls are covered with hieroglyphs telling stories of gods and immortality. Gold leaf catches the dim lamplight, making the entire chamber seem to pulse with an otherworldly glow. If we believe the official history written by the Romans, Octavian Augustus's men burst into the chambers to check on the prisoner. What do they see? Cleopatra lies on a golden bed. She is completely motionless. Her two faithful handmaidens, Iris and Charmian, are fading away at her feet. There are no signs of struggle or wounds on the queen's body, only two tiny, barely visible dots on her arm. But here's what the Roman accounts deliberately omit. When the guards first entered, one of the handmaidens, Charmian, was still barely conscious. A guard reportedly asked her, "Was this well done of your lady?" And with her dying breath, she answered, "Extremely well, and as became the descendant of so many kings." Think about that response. Not a cry of despair, not a plea for mercy, a defiant political statement. This was a coordinated exit executed with military precision. Rome's official verdict was unambiguous and very convenient for everyone. She took her own life with the bite of an asp, an Egyptian cobra. But any modern snake expert will tell you that this beautiful version falls apart at the first serious check. Here is why. Size and delivery. The Egyptian cobra is not a pocket toy. It is a powerful, angry snake that grows up to 2 meters or 6.5 feet in length. How do you secretly sneak a 2-meter predator in a small fruit basket past attentive Roman guards? Roman soldiers were cruel conquerors, but they were not fools. The emperor's personal guard checked every item brought into the tomb. Hiding a giant snake in a basket of figs is a fairy tale invented for poetry, not reality. Moreover, cobras are aggressive when confined. The moment you try to stuff one into a basket, it will strike repeatedly, making noise, hissing loudly. The guards would have heard it. They would have seen the basket moving. This wasn't just difficult, it was virtually impossible. The reality of the venom. Death by cobra is never beautiful or instant. The venom paralyzes the muscles responsible for breathing, but this doesn't happen in a second like in the movies. It involves long hours of heavy fading, full of physical pain, spasms, and severe swelling. A person's face changes so much it becomes hard to recognize. The skin turns dark and blotchy, the eyes bulge, foam appears at the mouth. Yet, when the Romans entered the room, Cleopatra lay in a pose of perfect peace, like a sculpture, in her best royal robes with a crown on her head. Her makeup was perfect, her hair was arranged. She looked as if she had simply fallen into a deep sleep. Ancient sources specifically mentioned that her face was serene and beautiful. Medical experts today suggest a completely different scenario. Cleopatra likely used a carefully prepared cocktail of plant-based poisons, perhaps a mixture of hemlock, opium, and aconite, substances she had tested extensively. These could produce a peaceful death that looked like sleep, especially when the dosage was precisely calculated. The 2 marks on her arm, possibly self-inflicted to create the snake story, or perhaps caused by a different injection method altogether. Octavian needed her disgrace, not her peace. It was vital for him to lead her in chains through the streets of Rome as a living trophy to demonstrate his power. Instead, he got a pristine, untouched goddess who slipped through his fingers at the very last moment, depriving him of his main triumph. He was furious. Rumor has it he even called snake charmers to try and suck out the poison. The Emperor of Rome tried to bring her back, not out of pity, but for power. But it was too late. The irony? By accepting the snake story, Octavian unknowingly helped Cleopatra achieve exactly what she wanted: immortalization as a divine figure who chose the sacred serpent, the symbol of royalty, to carry her to the gods. To understand the true meaning of her grand plan, we need to completely banish the image of the beauty from old Hollywood movies from our heads. It is time to forget the femme fatale who spends her days bathing in milk. Reality was much harsher and more interesting. Let's look at the coins of that time, which have survived to this day. These are the most accurate portraits. Looking back at us is not a delicate beauty, but a woman with a large hooked nose, a strong protruding chin, and a hard, piercing, almost masculine gaze. This is the face of a politician and a boss, not a fashion model. Cleopatra wasn't even Egyptian. She was a pure-blooded Greek from the Ptolemaic family. Her ancestors were direct heirs of the generals of Alexander the Great. And here lies a detail that is truly chilling. Her family was obsessed with blood purity. For 300 years, they married only within the family, between brothers and sisters. By the laws of nature, Cleopatra should have been born with a host of severe illnesses. But nature played a surprising joke. Instead of illness, a unique spark occurred. She was born a genius. She was the first and only one of her family who bothered to learn the Egyptian language. Her ancestors ruled the country for 300 years while despising the language of the people they governed. She, however, spoke 7, maybe 9 languages fluently. She read complex scientific works in the original, deeply studied medicine, the stars, and the higher mathematics of the time. But here's what truly sets her apart. She didn't
Inform the
just learn
admirals we sail at
languages as a
dawn.
hobby.
The
She
bronze
used
ships
them
take
as
this
weapons
position
of diplomacy. When Ethiopian ambassadors arrived, she greeted them in their native tongue, shocking them into immediate respect. When Jewish leaders came to negotiate, she discussed their religious texts in Hebrew. When Parthian envoys visited, she switched to their language mid-conversation. Each time she gained a psychological advantage. These men weren't dealing with an ignorant foreign queen. They were dealing with someone who understood their culture better than they expected. Imagine a woman who, early in the morning, discusses naval war plans with experienced admirals. During the day, switches to another language to conduct tough negotiations with ambassadors of neighboring countries, and deep in the night, by lamplight, writes a scientific book on medicines, weights, and measures, or the properties of poisons. Historical records tell us she authored works on cosmetics, hair care, medicine, and weights and measures. These weren't vanity projects. These were technical manuals. She was essentially writing operating procedures for running a sophisticated state. Her work on weights and measures helped standardize trade across Egypt. Her medical texts incorporated knowledge from Greek, Egyptian, and Eastern traditions. She was doing cross-cultural scientific synthesis centuries before the Renaissance. This is not Caesar's mistress. This is the general director, CEO, of a giant, wealthy corporation called Egypt. And Rome wanted to acquire this corporation. She understood the balance of power perfectly. The Romans were invincible in open combat. They had the best soldiers, the best engineers, and iron discipline. Egypt could no longer defeat them by force of arms. Their last naval battle at Actium proved that. Antony's fleet was destroyed, his army surrendered without much of a fight. Militarily, it was over. What does a genius strategist do when they realize they will lose the war? They completely change the rules of the game, moving the war to a different place, inside the enemy's head. The ritual and the brand. Why a cobra? In the legends of ancient Egypt, the cobra is not just a dangerous animal. It is the sacred symbol of divine power worn on the crowns of kings, the uraeus. It is the sign of a goddess, specifically Wadjet, the protector of Lower Egypt. For an Egyptian, leaving life via the bite of a sacred snake meant not just the end of the physical body. It meant a direct ticket to the gods, bypassing the Last Judgment. It meant transformation, not termination. Cleopatra staged her finale like a grandiose play in a theater. She knew the Romans would find her body, and she counted on them not understanding the hidden meaning. But the common people of Egypt would understand everything without words. To Rome, it was an act of despair by a defeated woman. To the East, it was a departure to the gods. She did not surrender to the enemy. She went to the higher powers undefeated. Think about her cold, precise calculation. While Mark Antony, her husband and ally, panicked and made a fatal mistake upon receiving false news of her death, literally falling on his sword in grief, Cleopatra calmly and methodically tested different mixtures on criminals condemned to death. Ancient sources specifically mention this. She was looking for the perfect cocktail that would allow her to leave without pain and, most importantly, would not ruin her face after death. She watched these experiments closely. Which poison made the face contort? Which caused vomiting and loss of control? Which allowed the person to simply drift into sleep? She took notes. She adjusted formulas. She was running clinical trials on the method of her own death. She was preparing her final image, a brand that had to outlive her body. And it worked beyond her wildest dreams. While Octavian, even as Caesar Augustus, gained Egypt's wealth, Cleopatra gained immortality. 2,000 years later, her name still evokes power, mystery, intelligence, and beauty. Meanwhile, Octavian, even as Caesar Augustus, is known mainly to history students. She became a legend. He became a footnote in her story. Octavian Augustus was sure he had conquered Egypt. He took the rich treasury. He removed her supporters, but he missed the main thing. Cleopatra left a Trojan horse in the very heart of Roman culture. She left them her secret knowledge, her religion, and the idea of an eternal, divine empire. She lost the war of swords, but she was just beginning the war of minds and symbols. How did Cleopatra use advanced chemistry and the power of words to control the most powerful men in the world? We established that the queen's departure was not accidental, but the agonizing question remains. How did a woman in a brutal world of men, ruled by the raw force of armies, manage to keep all of Rome on edge for 20 years? Historians love to invent beautiful tales about her charms, claiming Caesar and Mark Antony simply lost their heads from love. Let's be realists and cast aside romance. Julius Caesar was a cunning, calculating 50-year-old commander who had seen thousands of women and survived hundreds of intrigues. Mark Antony was a rough soldier who loved drinking and simple entertainment. Could such men be subdued simply by beautiful eyes and conversation? No. Cleopatra didn't seduce them. She hacked them, using the weak points of the human psyche. The historian Plutarch, who never saw Cleopatra personally but carefully collected accounts from her contemporaries, writes a surprising, very important thing. Her beauty was not so ideal as to strike one at first sight. However, interacting with her possessed incredible power. The very sound of her voice delighted the ear. He compares her voice to a musical instrument upon which any melody could be played. Today, scientists would say she had mastered the technique of voice control. She knew how to masterfully change her tone, rhythm, and pitch to evoke trust at a deep level. This is exactly what elite Secret Service negotiators are taught today. She didn't just speak, she adjusted to her interlocutor. With Caesar, she was a brilliant scientist discussing philosophy and astronomy. With soldiers, a tough commander who understood military tactics. With Antony, her boyfriend, a fun girlfriend who could match him drink for drink and joke for joke. But voice is just the tip of the iceberg. Cleopatra was perhaps history's first known biohacker, a person who improves their body's performance through science. Many have likely heard the famous historical anecdote. Cleopatra bet Antony she could host the most expensive dinner in history. To win the bet, she took a huge, priceless pearl earring, valued at several million sesterces, threw it into a goblet of vinegar, waited for the pearl to dissolve, and drank the mixture in front of everyone. Sounds like the whim of a rich madwoman, right? Throwing away millions for a momentary bet? But let's look at this gesture through the lens of chemistry and medicine. Pearls are calcium carbonate. Vinegar is acid. Their reaction produces a substance that is good for the stomach and provides energy, essentially calcium acetate, which is still used in modern medicine. In ancient medicine, this was a powerful tonic. Combined with other additives that were surely in that drink, honey, wine, perhaps herbal extracts, it works like an energy drink. Modern nutritionists would recognize this as a sophisticated electrolyte and mineral supplement. The calcium would help with bone strength and nerve function. The acetic acid would aid digestion. It was expensive, yes, but it was functional. Cleopatra lived at a frantic pace, working 18 to 20 hours a day. She had to run a huge country, wage wars, and weave complex intrigues. She vitally needed fuel. That famous pearl wasn't empty showing off. It was an expensive, advanced dietary supplement for that time. She drank this elixir so her brain would work faster, clearer, and more efficiently than her enemies. She used a scientific approach where others saw only magic or crazy spending. But her biohacking went deeper. Ancient sources tell us she paid obsessive attention to her diet, her sleep cycles, and her physical conditioning. She understood that to negotiate with generals and emperors, she needed mental clarity and physical stamina. She reportedly practiced a form of controlled breathing, what we might call meditation today, to manage stress. She used specific foods and herbs to enhance memory and concentration. Deep in the basements of her palace, hidden from prying eyes, was a real scientific laboratory. This is the darkest, but also the most telling part of our story. We know she was actively interested in poisons, not as a common villain, but as an experimental scientist. Ancient texts dryly inform us that she tested the effects of various substances on condemned criminals. She needed to know exactly, to the second, how long a certain plant poison acted and what symptoms it produced. Could components be mixed so that a person faded not immediately, but over a week, making it look like a natural severe illness? Archaeological evidence supports this. Fragments found in Alexandria mention the queen's laboratory and list various substances: nightshade, hemlock, aconite, mandrake, opium. These weren't recreational drugs, these were research materials. To us today, this sounds gruesome, but for a ruler of that era, it was defense. Deep knowledge of dangerous substances was the only guarantee of personal safety. She knew exactly what her guests ate and knew what might be smeared on her enemies' blades. In a world where political rivals regularly used poison, this knowledge was survival. But her main invention, her secret weapon, was not poisons, but scents. Have you ever wondered why Mark Antony, a grim and experienced warrior, literally turned into her shadow, an obedient executor of her will? Romans despised him for this, calling him bewitched, and perhaps they were right in a very direct chemical sense. Egypt was famous for its master perfumers. The Egyptians had perfected the art of extracting essences from flowers, resins, and roots over thousands of years. One of the main substances of that era was kaifi. It is a complex mixture of 16 components: honey, wine, raisins, myrrh, juniper, and, pay attention, extracts of rare plants that strongly affect consciousness and mood. Modern analysis of ancient kaifi recipes reveals something fascinating. Many of the ingredients have psychoactive properties. Frankincense contains compounds that act as mild antidepressants. Myrrh has sedative effects. Certain resins used in the mixture contain substances similar to modern anxiolytics. This wasn't just perfume, it was aromatherapy, backed by centuries of empirical testing. When Cleopatra sailed to meet Antony on her famous ship at Tarsus, historians write that a wondrous thick scent of incense spread across the river to the very banks. People could smell her ship before they could see it. She didn't just arrange a business meeting, she arranged a powerful attack on the senses. Picture the scene. Antony stands on the shore, expecting to meet a defeated ally who needs his help. Instead, a ship appears that looks like it sailed straight out of myth. The sails are purple, the most expensive dye reserved for royalty. The deck is covered with flowers. Musicians play hypnotic melodies. And the smell, that intoxicating, heavy smell that makes you feel relaxed, confident, almost euphoric. Beautiful music, dimmed lights, and most importantly, heavy aromas that literally change brain function. Antony fell into an invisible cloud where he felt too good. She created an artificial comfort zone for him from which it was impossible to leave voluntarily. In cold, military Rome, it smelled of sweat, leather, and iron. With Cleopatra, it smelled of paradise and pleasure. It was pure chemistry plus calculation. She bound the leader of Rome tightly to herself. But she went even further. Ancient sources mention that she gave Antony specific oils to wear, that she burned particular incenses in their chambers. She was essentially conditioning him, creating a chemical dependency where his brain associated pleasure and comfort with her presence. Modern perfume makers use similar principles, but Cleopatra was doing it 2,000 years ago with deadly precision. But even chemistry and natural intellect did not save her from big politics. When she realized Rome could not be defeated from the outside by force of arms, she made a decision to rewrite it from the inside. She began a massive program to turn Rome into Egypt. Let's transport ourselves back a few years to when Cleopatra was still alive and arrived in Rome on an official visit. This was not the visit of a subordinate. It was the visit of a queen who brought technologies the Romans didn't have. It was here, in the center of the eternal city, that she began her subtlest game, a game whose fruits we use every day without even knowing it. Imagine the scene. Cleopatra is living at Caesar's villa across the Tiber. The Roman elite is in shock. Old senators are cursing and calling her names, foreign whore, Egyptian witch. But every evening, a line of Rome's smartest people forms at her doors. Why? Because Alexandria, where she came from, was the center of science, while Rome of that time was just a big military camp. Rome was excellent at law, warfare, and engineering, but mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy? In these fields, Alexandria was centuries ahead. The great library housed scholars from across the known world. The museum, the ancient equivalent of a research institute, was where the greatest minds studied. Cleopatra brought not only gold, she brought her astronomers, her doctors, and her architects. She staged an intellectual takeover. Romans, accustomed to winning with the sword, suddenly realized they were hopelessly behind in the sciences, and Cleopatra graciously offered help. This was a classic soft power strategy. She began to rebuild Roman thinking. The most important proof of her victory hangs on everyone's wall or glows in our phones: the calendar. Before Cleopatra, the Roman calendar was a complete nightmare, lagging behind real time by months. Priests had to manually add days, creating confusion. Farmers didn't know when to plant. Festivals drifted through the seasons. It was chaos. Cleopatra introduced Caesar to her personal scientist, Sosigenes of Alexandria. It was he who devised the solar calendar based on centuries of Egyptian astronomical observation. Think about it. The rhythm of our modern life, our 365 days a year, our leap years, this is Egyptian technology implemented by Cleopatra. Caesar simply signed it, but she set the time. The Julian calendar, named after Caesar, was really Cleopatra's gift to the world, and we still use an evolved version of it today. But the calendar is a trifle compared to what she did to politics. Rome prided itself on being ruled by the people and the Senate. Romans hated kings. They had overthrown their last king 500 years earlier and swore never to bow to monarchy again. And then Caesar appears, who, after interacting with Cleopatra, starts behaving strangely. He places a golden statue of himself in a temple. He starts dressing like a king. He begins demanding worship as a deity. He even contemplates moving the capital from Rome to Alexandria. Historians argue about why Caesar suddenly decided to become an emperor. The answer was sitting right next to him at the villa. Cleopatra showed him a different model of power, the Egyptian model, where the ruler is not just an official elected by people. The ruler is a living god. The pharaoh was both king and priest, both commander and deity. This power was absolute, eternal, passed through divine bloodline. She instilled in him that his power must be absolute and eternal. Look at what happened. Caesar started wearing red boots, a symbol of ancient kings. He sat on a golden throne. He allowed his image to be placed on coins while he was still alive, something unheard of in Rome. He accepted the title Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life. The old guard of Rome saw what was happening. They saw their republic being transformed into an Eastern despotism. That's why they killed him. The liberators literally called themselves liberators. They thought they were saving Rome from becoming Egypt. And although Caesar was removed by senators trying to save the old order, the virus had already been launched. Octavian Augustus, who defeated Cleopatra, eventually became the first emperor of Rome himself. He destroyed the queen, but he built his empire according to her blueprints. The old order fell. The Egyptian model won. Augustus claimed to hate everything Cleopatra stood for. He portrayed her as a foreign seductress who corrupted Rome. But look at what he did. He declared himself princeps, first citizen. He became Pontifex Maximus, high priest. He allowed divine honors. He established a dynasty. He built monuments on the Egyptian scale. He turned Rome from brick to marble, imitating Alexandria. The students surpassed the teacher, but used the exact same playbook. But the strongest change happened not in palaces, but on the streets. While soldiers fought Egypt, ordinary Romans began praying to Egyptian gods. The cult of the goddess Isis spread through Rome like a forest fire. Why? Because the dry Roman gods demanded only discipline, sacrifice, and duty, while Isis promised personal salvation, life after death, kindness, and the hope of resurrection. Traditional Roman religion was cold and transactional. You made sacrifices to Jupiter and maybe he'd help you, maybe not. There was no comfort, no promise of an afterlife, no personal relationship with the divine. But the Isis cult offered something revolutionary: personal redemption, gender equality, women could be priestesses, emotional connection, mystery, and ritual that engaged the senses. The ceremonies involved music, incense, beautiful robes, dramatic reenactments of the goddess's myths. It was experiential, emotional, transformative. Look at the maps of ancient Rome. Temples of Isis stood everywhere. Women dressed like Cleopatra. Egyptian fashion became mainstream. Wealthy Romans decorated their homes with Egyptian motifs. They wore Egyptian jewelry. They learned Egyptian mysteries. It was a cultural takeover. Romans began to believe that real power, real wisdom, real connection to the divine came from the banks of the Nile. Cleopatra, who called herself the earthly incarnation of Isis, the new Isis, became not just an enemy, she became part of the enemy's faith. And when the physical Cleopatra departed, her image dissolved into religion. Statues of Isis holding the infant Horus started to look suspiciously like Cleopatra holding Caesarion. The cult survived for centuries. Even as Christianity began to spread, Isis worship continued. The last temple of Isis wasn't closed until 550 AD, more than 500 years after Cleopatra's death. That's longer than the United States has existed. But one unresolved question remained. She had a son, Caesarion, the child of Julius Caesar, the legitimate heir to the two greatest empires of the world. Officially, he does not exist, but some traces lead us to places that are scary to speak of aloud. We approach the most mysterious part of our investigation. Here, history ends and conjecture begins. Caesarion, Little Caesar, Ptolemy 15, Philopator, Caesar, the last king of Egypt. Octavian Augustus allegedly said the phrase, "Too many Caesars is not good," a quote from Homer, and ordered his liquidation. But no one saw the body. No records of a burial place. The boy simply disappeared. There is a theory that Cleopatra, realizing her end, sent her son with huge funds to India or Ethiopia. Some historians point to mysterious references in Indian texts to a Western prince who arrived with great wealth. Could he have survived? Could his bloodline remain hidden in Europe or Asia? It is impossible to prove. But let's look at what cannot be hidden, at buildings and stones. Let's move to our days, the Vatican. St. Peter's Square, the center of the Western faith, the place where millions come to listen to the Pope. Look at the very center of the square. What stands there? It is not a cross. It is not a statue of a saint. It is a gigantic Egyptian obelisk, a stone of the sun. This pillar was taken from Egypt by Emperor Caligula in 37 AD. It was created for the worship of the sun god, Ra, and stood in the temple at Heliopolis. It was brought to Rome as a trophy. But why did the heads of the church, destroying old idols all over Europe, smashing pagan temples, burning heretical texts, keep this giant Egyptian symbol in the center of their home? Moreover, they spent huge funds to install it. In 1586, Pope Sixtus V ordered the obelisk moved to its current location. It took 900 workers, 75 horses, and countless ropes and pulleys.
The engineering feat was so dangerous that the Pope ordered silence on pain of death during the operation. One mistake could have killed dozens and destroyed the monument. Why take this risk for a pagan idol? If you look at the square from above, we see an amazing picture. The square looks like a keyhole, or the Egyptian symbol Ankh, the key of life. The colonnades embrace the space like arms, drawing people into the symbolic womb of the church. This design is no accident. Let's go further. Look at the paintings. One of the most popular images in ancient Egypt is the goddess Isis holding infant Horus in her arms. Compare this with early images of the Madonna and Child.
Isis,
the resemblance is not just
goddess,
striking, it is complete.
grant me
The
strength.
pose, the gentle embrace, the sacred child, even the throne-like seat, all borrowed directly from Egyptian iconography. Art historians admit when the new faith came to Egypt and Rome, it absorbed familiar images to the people. Statues of Isis were not smashed, they were simply renamed. The image of the mother changed, but kept its visual essence. And now look at the headrests of priests, the tall mitre. Compare it with the crown of pharaohs, or the headrest of Egyptian priests. The papal staff, the crozier. Compare it with the shepherd's crook held by Egyptian gods and pharaohs. We see a direct link of symbols of power. Even the concept of the Pope, a single, infallible spiritual leader who is the earthly representative of God, mirrors the pharaonic system, where the ruler was both king and high priest, both human and divine intermediary. The Roman Empire fell politically in 476 AD, but the system of managing people's thoughts, invented in Egypt and refined by Cleopatra, survived. It adapted, it evolved, but the core remained. The use of ritual, symbol, hierarchy, and mystery to bind people to a central authority. It paints an amazing picture. Cleopatra may have lost the battle for the throne, but her system won. We live by her calendar. We admire the model of power, the idea of which she gave to Caesar. The spiritual center of the Western world stands around an Egyptian monument. So who really won?
Why, despite all these successes, was Egypt as a state doomed? And why does the science of the spread of ideas consider
Bernini's
Cleopatra
masterpiece,
the most
Keyhole of
successful
St. Peter,
blogger in
a
history?
dramatic embrace
It
concealing
is time
ancient
for the
secrets
most
beneath the
important
Vatican.
question. If Cleopatra was such a genius, such a scientist and political seer, why did she still lose Egypt? Why did her family lose power? To be honest, we must include cold logic. Genetics. Cleopatra's first enemy was not Octavian Augustus. The enemy was inside, in her own DNA. Her family had practiced inbreeding for centuries. While Cleopatra was born healthy, at least mentally, her lineage was a ticking time bomb. Scientists speak of genetic fatigue. The body weakens, immune systems fail, mental problems appear. Look at her siblings. Her brother-husband Ptolemy XIII was weak and easily manipulated. Her sister Arsinoe was unstable. Cleopatra was a bright flash before the star went out. Even if she had defeated Rome, her dynasty would likely have faded in a couple of generations. Nature cannot be cheated forever. Climate and money. During Cleopatra's reign, the Nile was unpredictable. Volcanic eruptions in distant lands affected global weather patterns. Droughts caused bad harvests. The famous grain shipments that fed Rome were failing. Prices in Egypt rose terribly. The people grew poor and restless. Cleopatra tried to save money, devaluing the currency, but the laws of economics are inexorable. Rome was a young predator with a growing economy, constantly absorbing new territories and resources. Egypt was an old, tired giant sitting on past glories. Cleopatra understood this better than anyone. She knew the ship was sinking. That is precisely why she initiated the operation to merge with Rome. She wasn't trying to defeat Rome, but to move into it, to transplant Egypt's brain into Rome's body, to create a hybrid empire where her son would rule both east and west,
combining Roman military power with Egyptian wisdom. That plan failed when Octavian killed Caesarion, but the deeper plan, the cultural invasion, succeeded beyond measure. And here we come to the concept of the meme. This is a unit of cultural information that behaves like a virus. It infects minds, multiplies, and changes. The term was coined by Richard Dawkins in 1976, but the practice was perfected by Cleopatra 2,000 years earlier. Cleopatra launched the most powerful idea virus in history, the idea of an empire of divine light, an empire where the ruler is chosen by heaven, where power is both military and spiritual, where symbols matter as much as swords, where cultural sophistication equals political strength. Cleopatra understood this better than anyone. She knew the ship was sinking. That is precisely why she initiated the operation to merge with Rome. She wasn't trying to defeat Rome, but to move into it, to transplant Egypt's brain into Rome's body, to create a hybrid empire where her son would rule both East and West, combining Roman military power with Egyptian wisdom. That plan failed when Octavian killed Caesarion, but the deeper plan, the cultural invasion, succeeded beyond measure. And here we come to the concept of the meme. This is a unit of cultural information that behaves like a virus. It infects minds, multiplies, and changes. The term was coined by Richard Dawkins in 1976, but the practice was perfected by Cleopatra 2,000 years earlier. Cleopatra launched the most powerful idea virus in history, the idea of an empire of divine light, an empire where the ruler is chosen by heaven, where power is both military and spiritual, where symbols matter as much as swords, where cultural sophistication equals political strength. Cleopatra understood this better than anyone. She knew the ship was sinking. That is precisely why she initiated the operation to merge with Rome. She wasn't trying to defeat Rome, but to move into it, to transplant Egypt's brain into Rome's body, to create a hybrid empire where her son would rule both East and West, combining Roman military power with Egyptian wisdom. That plan failed when Octavian killed Caesarion, but the deeper plan, the cultural invasion, succeeded beyond measure. And here we come to the concept of the meme. This is a unit of cultural information that behaves like a virus. It infects minds, multiplies, and changes. The term was coined by Richard Dawkins in 1976, but the practice was perfected by Cleopatra 2,000 years earlier. Cleopatra launched the most powerful idea virus in history, the idea of an empire of divine light, an empire where the ruler is chosen by heaven, where power is both military and spiritual, where symbols matter as much as swords, where cultural sophistication equals political strength. Cleopatra understood this better than anyone. She knew the ship was sinking. That is precisely why she initiated the operation to merge with Rome. She wasn't trying to defeat Rome, but to move into it, to transplant Egypt's brain into Rome's body, to create a hybrid empire where her son would rule both East and West, combining Roman military power with Egyptian wisdom. That plan failed when Octavian killed Caesarion, but the deeper plan, the cultural invasion, succeeded beyond measure. And here we come to the concept of the meme. This is a unit of cultural information that behaves like a virus. It infects minds, multiplies, and changes. The term was coined by Richard Dawkins in 1976, but the practice was perfected by Cleopatra 2,000 years earlier. Cleopatra launched the most powerful idea virus in history, the idea of an empire of divine light, an empire where the ruler is chosen by heaven, where power is both military and spiritual, where symbols matter as much as swords, where cultural sophistication equals political strength. Cleopatra understood this better than anyone. She knew the ship was sinking. That is precisely why she initiated the operation to merge with Rome. She wasn't trying to defeat Rome, but to move into it, to transplant Egypt's brain into Rome's body, to create a hybrid empire where her son would rule both East and West, combining Roman military power with Egyptian wisdom. That plan failed when Octavian killed Caesarion, but the deeper plan, the cultural invasion, succeeded beyond measure. And here we come to the concept of the meme. This is a unit of cultural information that behaves like a virus. It infects minds, multiplies, and changes. The term was coined by Richard Dawkins in 1976, but the practice was perfected by Cleopatra 2,000 years earlier. Cleopatra launched the most powerful idea virus in history, the idea of an empire of divine light, an empire where the ruler is chosen by heaven, where power is both military and spiritual, where symbols matter as much as swords, where cultural sophistication equals political strength. Cleopatra understood this better than anyone. She knew the ship was sinking. That is precisely why she initiated the operation to merge with Rome. She wasn't trying to defeat Rome, but to move into it, to transplant Egypt's brain into Rome's body, to create a hybrid empire where her son would rule both East and West, combining Roman military power with Egyptian wisdom. That plan failed when Octavian killed Caesarion, but the deeper plan, the cultural invasion, succeeded beyond measure. And here we come to the concept of the meme. This is a unit of cultural information that behaves like a virus. It infects minds, multiplies, and changes. The term was coined by Richard Dawkins in 1976, but the practice was perfected by Cleopatra 2,000 years earlier. Cleopatra launched the most powerful idea virus in history, the idea of an empire of divine light, an empire where the ruler is chosen by heaven, where power is both military and spiritual, where symbols matter as much as swords, where cultural sophistication equals political strength. Cleopatra understood this better than anyone. She knew the ship was sinking. That is precisely why she initiated the operation to merge with Rome. She wasn't trying to defeat Rome, but to move into it, to transplant Egypt's brain into Rome's body, to create a hybrid empire where her son would rule both East and West, combining Roman military power with Egyptian wisdom. That plan failed when Octavian killed Caesarion. But the deeper plan, the cultural invasion, succeeded beyond measure. And here we come to the concept of the meme. This is a unit of cultural information that behaves like a virus. It infects minds, multiplies, and changes. The term was coined by Richard Dawkins in 1976, but the practice was perfected by Cleopatra 2,000 years earlier. Cleopatra launched the most powerful idea virus in history, the idea of an empire of divine light, an empire where the ruler is chosen by heaven, where power is both military and spiritual, where symbols matter as much as swords, where cultural sophistication equals political strength. Cleopatra understood this better than anyone. She knew the ship was sinking. That is precisely why she initiated the operation to merge with Rome. She wasn't trying to defeat Rome,